We start in the name of God, the most beneficent, the most merciful. All praise is due to God, the Lord of the worlds, and may peace and blessings of God be upon his Prophet Muhammad, his family, and companions. Students, faculty, friends, and colleagues, I greet you all with the Islamic greeting of peace. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Today is the fifth event in a series of events sponsored by the Muslim Student Union at UCI. The Muslim Student Union is a religious student organization which aims to provide a comfortable space where students develop into confident, spiritual, moral, and high-achieving leaders who in turn are a positive influence and example for their surrounding communities. This week, titled Palestine Liberation Week, Getting to the Roots of the Occupation, aims to educate and raise awareness on campus about the plight of the Palestinian people, who have been living under illegal occupation for almost 64 years, with the hope that this knowledge will turn into action. Our annual week has unfortunately been misconstrued to be one that harbors anti-Semitism. The MSU has clarified numerous times, and will continue to clarify, that hatred of any particular group on the basis of their race, color, ethnicity, or religion, including people of the Jewish faith, is not and will not be tolerated. We will be the first to speak out against these injustices, just as we would speak up against any other form of racism, no matter what group it targets. Although this goes without saying, the MSU strives to explicitly state its beliefs nonetheless. It is absolutely hypocritical and immoral to label anyone who has the courage to stand up and speak out against the apartheid policies of Israel as anti-Semitic. The week's aim, in short, is simply to call for an end to the oppression of the indigenous Palestinians. Just as it would make sense to call for an end to the oppression that took place in Nazi Germany or apartheid South Africa, it is absolutely imperative that we call for an end to 64 years of systematic subjugation and repression of the Palestinian people. We will be having a Q&A session after the talk, so please hold all your questions till the end, and please do not disrupt the speaker. Co-sponsors for this week include Students for Justice in Palestine, Afghanistan Development Project, Alianza, Kaba Bayan, Asian Pacific Student Association, Central American Student Association, Dreams at UCI, Kaba Bayan, Radical Student Union, and Society of Arab Students. Before we start today's event, we will begin with some verses from the Muslim holy book, the Quran.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You guys must always be wondering why we recite from this book, and this is because we use the book, the words of God, the Quran, to implement things in our daily lives that we wouldn't necessarily do without this guidance. And you'll see that in the translation of what will be recited.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وما لكم لا تقاتلون في سبيل الله والمستضعفين من الرجال والنساء والولدان الذين يقولون ربنا أخرجنا من هذه القرية الظالم أهلها واجعل لنا من لدنك وليا واجعل لنا من لدنك نصيرا صدق الله العظيم. And what is the matter with you, that you fight not in the cause of Allah and for the oppressed among men, women, and children, who say, Our Lord, take us out of this city of oppressive people, and appoint for us from yourself a protector, and appoint for us from yourself a helper. Assalamu alaikum.
Thank you. As a Holocaust survivor, political activist Hedy Epstein lost her parents and most of her family to the Jewish ethnic cleansing of World War II. After traveling to Israeli-occupied West Bank, Epstein witnessed firsthand the injustice and violation of human rights imposed upon the Palestinians by Israel. Since then, Epstein's activism has spoken out against the Israeli occupation of the West Bank and the siege of Gaza, which has included her participation in several nonviolent demonstrations against Israel. Without further ado, Hedy.
Good afternoon, everybody. That's better. Thank you. I feel sorry for you having to sit in the hot sun, and I have the privilege of being under this awning. And I'm nice and cool, and the wind is blowing, cooling me off. I usually don't start the way I start my presentation the way I'm going to start it today. Just before I left home yesterday, and home is in St. Louis, Missouri, I got an email, and I didn't even have time to read it. I took it with me, and I read it on the plane, and it didn't make for a happy plane ride. But what I learned is that your president, Mark Yudof, issued a public letter in which he said, he referred to the protests on UC campuses against Israeli occupation of the West Bank and Gaza as hateful incidents. I think his statement is a hateful incident. And this is my third or fourth time speaking here, and I can't really say that things have gotten better here on this campus. And this statement by Mark Yudof doesn't make it any better. In fact, it makes it worse. And in order to improve it, I think I'd like to start something today. Let's start a petition trying to ask him, or not trying, and asking him to resign. It's time he goes. So someone please write up a petition, and I'd be happy to be the very first one to sign it. So now to why I'm really here. That's not why I came. And it's why I wish I wouldn't have had to come. I was born in Germany, and I lived in a village in southwest Germany in the Black Forest area, where my father's side of the family had lived for many generations. When Hitler came to power on January 30th, 1933, I was 8 years old. And I remember my parents and other adults talking about Hitler, first saying they hoped he wouldn't come to power, and after he did, saying they hoped he wouldn't remain in power very long. I didn't really understand what that was all about as an 8-year-old. I thought it was just some adults talking a lot of nonsense. But very soon after that, I began to realize, and it began to realize increasingly more so, what it means to live as a Jew in Germany under the Nazi regime. And my parents, of course, realized it much more even than I did. And they decided that in order to raise a family, they really need to get out of Germany. And they were willing to go anywhere in the world and do anything just to get out. But there was one place they were not willing to go to, and that was Palestine. And why was that? Because they were anti-Zionists. And again, as a very young child, I didn't totally understand what Zionism or anti-Zionism is. But if my parents were anti-Zionists, then I was an anti-Zionist too. And I remember going one day to my grandmother and saying, "Grandma, I'm an anti-Zionist." And she said, "Don't talk about that." And I said, "Well, Mommy and Daddy are anti-Zionists too. Don't talk about that." And my parents' efforts to leave Germany became increasingly more desperate. And finally, in May of 1939, my parents had decided just shortly before that, that maybe if one of us has an opportunity to leave, then that person should leave, and hopefully the rest can follow soon thereafter. And the opportunity came for me to leave on May 18th, 1939, on a children's transport or a kinder transport. And we all went to England. England took in almost 10,000, mostly Jewish children, in the 9 months preceding World War II, and would have taken more, except the war broke out. My parents were not so fortunate. They, as well as other family members, in October of 1940 were deported, and subsequently in the summer of 1942, those who survived those camps, those earlier camps, were deported to Auschwitz, where they all perished. I came to this country in May 1948, about the same time that Israel became a state, and I had some really mixed feelings about it. On one hand, I was glad that there was a place for people to go to who maybe were not able to return or chose not to return to their place of residence or to their former homes. But on the other hand, I remembered my parents' ardent anti-Zionism, and I was afraid that somewhere down the road, no good would come of that. What that might be, I couldn't possibly imagine. But I was new in the United States, and new things to learn, and new impressions, and new things to become involved in, such as the civil rights movement, etc. And so Israel and Palestine were on the back burner of my interest and remained there for quite a long time. I got a wake-up call in 1982. I heard something about the massacres in 2 refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, located in Lebanon. And I needed to find out what was that all about, who was responsible for it, who was adversely affected by it, and what happened between 1948 and 1982 when I paid little or no attention to that part of the world. And as I learned more and understood more, I began to speak out against the policies and practices of the Israeli government and the Israeli military vis-a-vis the Palestinian people and their land. And I began to speak out publicly against that, not just amongst my friends, but I went out wherever I could and raised my concerns. Fast forward to 2003. I participated in September of 2003 at a vigil in St. Louis, where I live, against the war in Iraq. And a friend of mine was standing next to me, and she said, she asked me, have you ever thought about going to Palestine? And I was shocked by my response, which was, yes, I'm going. Well, wait a minute, what did I just say? I haven't made any plans to go, but apparently, subconsciously, in my head, I had been preparing myself to go. And so a couple months later, this friend, 2 other women from St. Louis, and I were in the Israeli-occupied West Bank, all of us for the very first time. We were to be met at the airport in Tel Aviv by a friend of ours who had already been to the West Bank and Gaza since a couple months earlier. And we couldn't find him anywhere at the airport. And so we left a message on his cell phone saying, Mark, we're at the airport, we looked for you, we couldn't find you, so we're going on to the place where you arranged for us to spend the first night. And see you soon. And then we went out to get into a service, which is sort of like a large cab. When it's full, it takes off. And while we're still waiting for other people to come, we got our phone rang. That must be Mark. But no, it was not Mark. The voice at the other end identified himself by name and military rank and said, we have Mark, we have detained him, we're interrogating him. Where are you? Where are you going? Can we help you? And we very quickly hung up, because if we're going to tell this person where we are or where we're going, they're going to come and get us and detain us, and that was not our reason for coming there. And we contacted the American Embassy and told them what we knew about Mark and asked for help, and we're told the Israelis won't tell the American Embassy any information about anyone they have detained until they're released. Well, so much for help from the American Embassy. Mark and his Palestinian driver and a Palestinian friend who accompanied him were stopped at a checkpoint, and they found some very incriminating material in Mark's backpack. He had a UNESCO, a United Nations Educational, whatever it stands for, organization, pamphlet in his backpack, and they thought that was very incriminating. They were detained for 13 hours. They were blindfolded and handcuffed. The two Palestinian men were treated pretty badly, Mark not quite as badly. We caught up with Mark after he and the two other men were released. We aligned ourselves with the International Solidarity Movement, or ISM. And if you do that, if you want to work with ISM, you have to undergo rigorous nonviolent resistance training. And we underwent that training, and we heard the word nonviolent, nonviolent over and over again. And you have to make a commitment that no matter whom you encounter, no matter what situation you encounter, you will always be nonviolent. And we made that commitment. And so off we went on to our very first Palestinian community, which was Jayush, which is located northwest of Jerusalem. Jayush is a very old town, and many of the homes there are built on top of old Roman ruins. The people in the community there, the farmers, refer to the olive trees as Roman trees, because some of them go back to the time of when the Romans were there. Now, the Romans are gone, but many, or if not all, of those trees are gone too. At the time that we were there, some of them were still there. Jayush was surrounded by a fence, and I really mean a fence, not a wall, at the time we were there. It's long since 2003. It's been completely surrounded by a wall 25 feet tall. I'm 5 feet tall, so put 5 of me on top of each other. That's how tall that wall is. And all the land that the farmers there cultivate is on the other side of that wall. And so the community is really suffering a great deal. The livelihood of people has been taken away from them. We participated in our first nonviolent demonstration on the 26th of December 2003 in the community of Masha, which is also located northwest, northwest of Jerusalem. At the time, the community also was surrounded by a fence. It's now surrounded by a wall. And in that fence, there was a gate, at which the soldiers sometimes opened so that the farmers could go to their land on the other side of that fence. But that gate had not been opened for 2 weeks. And so some of the people in the community had tried to open the gate, and live ammunition was shot at them by Israeli soldiers, and so they retreated back into the village. And the demonstration was, the goal of that demonstration was, we're going to try and open that gate, and if we're successful, we will not go through it. It will be just, we'll attempt to try and open it. And the demonstration started. Thank you. The demonstration started in the community center, and we walked through the village towards the gate. And participating in this demonstrations were Israelis, Palestinians, and internationals. And it was decided that the Israelis should go up front, and they wore signs on their shirts saying in Hebrew, "I am an Israeli Jew." And behind the Israelis were the internationals, and the Palestinians were all the way in the back. And the reason for that was because it was known that the Israeli soldiers will shoot at Palestinians. So if they're way in the back, that will give them some kind of protection. The very first person that was critically injured was a young Israeli by the name of Gilna Amati, who had just been released from serving his 3 years mandatory service 2 weeks before. And maybe because of what he did or what he saw others do, he felt it incumbent upon himself to protest against the soldiers of whom he had just been a part until 2 weeks before. His aorta was severed, and I had never seen anyone bleed as profusely as he did. I didn't think he was going to make it. He did. I understand he has trouble walking. He has other medical and psychological problems. One of the women that I was with was injured also, not as severely, fortunately. The Israelis used a bullet that they shot into the ground. It explodes and fragments fly in every which direction. And one of those fragments lodged just below her knee. When we left several weeks later, our group of 4 broke up because 2 of them decided to stay longer, and one of the others, who was a college professor, needed to get back to teach. And I didn't want her to travel alone, and so I chose to go with her. When we arrived at the airport in Tel Aviv, we were immediately separated. She was told to go to the right, and I was told to go to the left, which didn't make any sense to me. And so I tried to rationalize it, and you can't really rationalize anything that the Israelis do. And I said, well, Diane is Christian, so maybe the Christians go to the right, and I'm Jewish, so maybe Jews go to the left. And I had to go to the passport control, where everyone has to go to before they leave. And I turned in my passport and ticket, and the young woman there typed something in the computer, and seemingly growing out of the ground, like right next to me, there were 2 men who identified themselves as security. And they wore name tags, but the name tags were turned around. And so I asked them, what are your names? And they remained silent and merely said, come with us. And I had some things that I was going to take on the plane with me, sitting on the floor next to me. And I bent down to pick them up, and they said, no, don't touch them, we will take them. And I realized there's a problem, and I was trying to make a little bit light of it, and trying to sort of pacify myself a bit. And I said, oh, you said you were security, but actually you're porters. Well, they did not respond. And I was taken to what I later found out was the police station in the airport. It's a huge room, but a part of it is partitioned off, and it has a curtain in front of it. And I was asked to enter into this little cubicle. And a young woman, about 22 or 23, patted me and wanded me, and then she said, get undressed. And I said, you have no right to ask me to do this. I want an attorney. She said, sure, you can have an attorney, but until you have an attorney, you will be detained in the airport detention center. Now, how was I going to get an attorney? I didn't have one, didn't even know one. How was I going to get one since they took my cell phone? I had no way of communicating with anybody except with this woman. And not knowing what was happening to my friend Diane, are they doing the same thing to her or worse? And one of us has to get out, and maybe I'm going to be the one who's going to get out and can help her if she's in a bad situation. And so I submitted to that, and that wasn't enough. After I stood there naked in front of this young woman, she said to me, and now bend over. And I said, why? And she said, because I need to examine you internally, front and back. And I asked her, I said, why are you doing this? Aren't you ashamed of yourself? And she said, because you're a security risk, because you're a terrorist. So if any of you here are afraid of being in the company of a terrorist, feel free to leave. I won't hold it against you. Thank you for staying. Thank you. Thank you. About 3 hours into this ordeal, my friend Diane was brought into the room, and she was just amazed to see me. She thought I was already on my way home. We were detained for a total of 5 hours. We, of course, missed our plane, and the Israeli security people made a reservation for us on the Israeli airline, which we had avoided. And the reservation was for the next morning. And so we said, oh, they told us we could leave and come back the next morning. And we said, no, no way. We're not going to go through this again tomorrow morning. So we spent the night at the airport. I understand that I was treated badly on the plane. I have no recollection of it. But my friend Diane is the one who told me this. Because I was so angry, so furious about what had happened to me the day before, that I was unaware of what my immediate surroundings were. And when I got back home, I still felt that anger and that rage, and I couldn't get rid of it. And I was internalizing it, and so I got some counseling. And though on the plane, while I was flying back, I wrote on all the pages of the magazines in front of me and in front of my friend Diane, saying, I will never ever come back, even though I wrote that I don't know how many times, sometimes pressing so hard that I tore the paper. By June of 2004, in other words, about 5 months later, I was back for the second time, and I've been back a third, a fourth, and a fifth time. The last time in 2007. And each time I participated in nonviolent demonstrations. At one of them, where I actually participated there three different times in the village of Bilin, which is not far from Ramallah. In 2006, during that demonstrations, which is always violent on the part of the Israelis, always nonviolent on the part of the demonstrators, who are Israeli sometimes, and Palestinian, and internationals. The Israelis used a sound bomb, which is extremely loud, and it went off not far from me, and I lost some of my hearing as a result of it. So later on, when you ask questions, please speak loudly, and I may still not hear you, because I now wear hearing aids. But yesterday, I realized that my hearing aids are broken. So I guess Israel's long arm has reached all the way here to Irvine. But that's only temporary, because I will be able to, hopefully, to get them fixed. I also tried to go to Gaza, and I made 5 different attempts to go to Gaza. The first one in 2008, the last one last year. 4 of them by boat, 1 of them by land. Last year was by boat. As you know, probably, I'm quite sure you know, there was flotilla number 1 in the year before. In other words, in 2010. And you know what happened there, that the Israelis attacked. 9 people lost their lives. A 10th one recently died of his injuries that he sustained at that time. About 50 people were injured. And so, undeterred, last year was flotilla number 2. There were 6 different boats from different countries. 2 from France, 1 from Sweden, 1 from Canada, 1 from the United States, called the U.S. boat to Gaza, the Audacity of Hope. And I was on that boat. And we were to leave from Greece, but Israel outsourced its occupation and it outsourced its siege of Gaza to Greece. And Greece was and still is, in dire financial straits. And I guess they yielded to pressure from Israel and agreed that no boats will leave Greece for Gaza. 2 of the boats, by the way, were sabotaged and had one worse than the other, and the one that was sabotaged worse than the other one, if it had attempted to leave and go out on the sea, it would have sunk. and all those people probably would have drowned. Fortunately, that didn't happen. Our captain, Captain John, an American, and we were 34 Americans on this boat, 34 passengers, American passengers, 4 American crew, and about 10 or 12 American media. Our captain at some point decided, we're going to try and break out. We probably won't make it, but let's give it a try, because sitting here isn't going to accomplish anything. And the Greek government isn't going to relent and let us go. And so I will never forget, it was the most amazing experience. I was at the part of the boat that was closest to land, and I saw this man, strong arms, well tanned, unraveling or unwinding the rope that was holding the boat to land. And then the, what do you call it, not the ramp, it has another name, it's escaping me right now, where you step onto the boat. That was horizontal all this time, and all of a sudden it went up slowly, slowly, slowly. And when it was totally vertical, the boat slowly started to move. And we were on our way to Gaza. And I knew something's going to happen. I don't know what. We're not going to make it. But until that happens, I will enjoy this wonderful freedom, this wonderful feeling of knowing I'm on my way to Gaza. Well, we only got 9 nautical miles out when the Greek Coast Guard came and told us to stop and turn around. And the person that was on that boat, from the Coast Guard person, appealed to us, please, I beg you, turn around. I'm with you, I'm supporting you, but I have my orders and I need you to follow those orders. So I'm begging you, please, please turn around. And we negotiated with him, first the captain and then some of us also, for close to 3 hours. And the Coast Guard person over and over again pleading with us to turn around and support, that he's supporting us. When the commandos arrived, dressed in black, on a black boat, and they boarded the Coast Guard boat with weapons, and I don't know, Uzis or whatever they were, with guns at the ready, ready to shoot at us. And they were ready to board our ship. And our captain wisely decided, our issue isn't with the Coast Guard, it isn't with the commandos. And so we will decide to turn around, and we did. And we were taken not to the port that we left from, but to another port in Greece, controlled by the American government. A port in Greece controlled by the American government. And we were behind razor wire. We were not allowed to get off. Our captain was arrested the following day. He spent 4 long days in a Greek jail, no food, no water, no bed, no toilet. And then thanks to some attorneys who worked very hard, he was released with some issues still pending. And I understand those issues are still pending even now. And that boat is still in that harbor, or that port in Greece. And I don't think it's getting any better, sitting there and not being used, but we have no access to it. It's behind razor wire, and it is not being released by the Greeks, or I should say by the Israelis. I could go on and tell you all kinds of awful stories about what I've experienced when I was in Palestine. And each time that I've been there, the situation has gotten worse. And since the last time that I was there in 2007, it's gotten worse yet. But I'm sure many of you know this, if not all of you. Maybe I should stop and let you ask some questions. And as a result of the questions, I'm sure I'll be able to provide you with some additional information. And remember, you got to speak very loudly, because I may not be able to hear you.
Thank you. We now have time for question and answer. Please keep your questions concise, relevant to the speaker's topic, and respectful of the speaker. After you have asked your question, please take a seat, and the speaker will only answer after you have sat down.
I've never spoken to an audience that didn't have any questions. So do you want me to say when I get back home, I was at UC Irvine and nobody asked a question? I guess I'm going to have to do that.
No, do we have the mic here?
Oh, I'm sorry. The mic is not on.
Well, I don't know if there's a button on there. I just thought almost there. But she's not going to hear me yet. Is this? Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Good. Thank you for your presentation. You and I have a couple of things in common. I'm a Jew and you're a Jew. You lost family members in the Holocaust, so have I. And I need you to help me connect a couple of dots here. You're sharing the platform with several different other speakers that are either connected or strongly supportive of groups like Hamas and Hezbollah and terrorist groups who clearly in their manifestos, on their websites and in public say that their ultimate goal is to kill all the Jews. So my question to you is, how can a survivor of the Holocaust possibly endorse, promote, and share the platform with other groups and other people who really want to get rid of the rest of our people? Thank you.
I don't know who the other people are that you refer to.
May I?
Yeah.
I do not mean to monopolize the microphone, but thank you for allowing me to do that. Yesterday there was a, I forgot his exact name, there was an imam, can somebody remind me of his name? Okay, that's the gentleman, Malik Ali. And he is strongly supportive of Hamas. He has said in public that he supports Hamas, he supports Hezbollah, and he supports suicide bombings. Now, I understand the crisis in the Middle East is not a one-sided thing. As a Jew, I see that we need dialogue, we need reconciliation, we need to work towards peace. But all I've seen so far this week is one-sided hatred and anti-Semitism, and I'm sick of it.
I want to remind you that Hamas was democratically elected with international, not supervision, but observers who said that the election was clean and free. I cannot speak to what the imam said yesterday. I didn't hear it. I don't know. I'm against all violence, regardless who the perpetrator is of that violence. And yes, I agree there has been some violence on the part of Palestinians, but it far outweighs the violence on the part of the Israelis on a daily basis. I get a report almost every day from someone in Australia who compiles this, what is happening in the West Bank and what is happening in Gaza. And it conveys not only what the Israelis do, but also what is being done by the Palestinians. And most of the time, it says no actions on the part of the Palestinians. And every single day, and every single hour, there are Palestinians who are killed, Palestinians whose homes are demolished, Palestinians who are lingering in jail right now, let's all remember the prisoners in the Israeli jails who are on a hunger strike. 2 of them are, and I'm getting chills as I think about it, 2 of them are today on their 71st day of a hunger strike. They're near death. And it's been known that no one has survived a hunger strike more than 75 days. So think about them. Think about the others who are, there are about 200 on a hunger strike. Some 20 days, some 40 days, varying amounts. And every day more of them are agreeing to go on a hunger strike in opposition to the treatment that they're receiving by the Israelis in the Israeli jails. And all of them are in violation of international laws and the Geneva Convention.
Okay, can I? Hi, Hedy. I'm so happy that you're still alive and speaking out the truth. When people talk about Hamas or suicide bombers, they really have to think 1948, what happened. All the Palestinians were dispossessed from their homeland. They were killed. They were in refugee camps. So you have to go back to the root of the problem. The Zionists came from Europe. They took them out of their homeland. I know many people who had to leave the Nakba. So please, let's talk about the root of the problem. And let's talk, sometimes stop just blaming the other person. Why can't we talk about settler violence? Do you know what happens in the West Bank, in the settlements? The American media never covers it. There is harassment and killing every day in the settlements. They went and kicked those people out of their homes. They're homeless, and they took over. They have the 80% of the water in the West Bank. Now, don't you think it's going to make some people mad? Please.
Thank you very much.
I had a quick question. I was engaging in dialogue with...
Would you speak in the microphone, please?
I was engaging in dialogue with another individual yesterday, and one of them said that they would like to have Palestinians return to their homeland, but if their homeland existed on what was now a current, where a current settler was residing, then they would have to be compensated in another way or form. So what is your response to that? What would you say to someone who says that a Palestinian returning to their homeland, if their property that they purchased was occupied by a settler, then they would have to be compensated in another way or form?
I full-heartedly agree. I think the right of return is something that should be given to the Palestinians. And if for some reason or other they are not able to return, or cannot, or choose not to return even, they are to be compensated for their losses. You know, after World War II, in the early 1950s, Germany passed some laws, some restitution laws, for people who either lost life or lost property and were compensated for their losses. That seems to be sort of, not only that it happened in Germany, it happened in other places also. And why can't it be that same right and that same privilege be given to the Palestinians who have lost their homes, have lost their land, have lost their livelihood?
I really support your courage that you are coming here and standing in solidarity with the Palestinian people. But I would like to give you an example. A few weeks ago in Glendale, a bear coming down from the mountain to the city. The police went there with a bullet, tranquilizer, make the bear to go to sleep. At the same time that they use bullet with tranquilizer to calm down the bear, they killed another black people with 90 bullets in Pasadena. I could name Trayvon Martin, what this system has been doing to their own people, here. It's a system. As long as we have this two-party system, Democrat and Republican, the state of Israel are going to be in power. It's going to be supported by military system to occupy not the Palestine, the whole Middle East. The problem is here. It's the U.S. are supporting a state of Israel, for years and years, no matter if it's Democrat or Republican. We have to deal with this whole system.
I agree with you. I agree with you, sir. Every year since 1948, and probably even prior to that, the United States, just to name one country, but primarily the United States, has been sending millions and millions of dollars and weaponry to Israel. And in this country, people are losing their homes, are unemployed, don't have health care or inadequate health care. And that money could be used and put to good use right here in the United States. And where does this money come from? It comes from, maybe you're not yet taxpayers, but if you are, and certainly your parents and your other family members who are taxpayers, that's where that money comes from. We, the taxpayers, unless we're not yet able to pay or not yet ready to pay taxes, and unless we are tax resistors, which I am, that money, your money, is going to Israel, is going to the destruction of the Palestinian people and their land. And I want to add something that, to the previous speaker, but being Jewish, I have a right to go to Israel anytime that I want to, and I will immediately can become an Israeli citizen. And I've never lived there. None of my family has ever lived there. But Palestinians who lost their homes are not allowed to go back. Now, it's possible, I should add a P.S., because of my activities, the Israeli intelligence probably knows about me, and maybe I would not be allowed to go back, even though I'm Jewish, because of my political activities. But essentially, all Jews are entitled to go back to Israel anytime they want to and become full-fledged Israeli citizens, a right that's been denied to Palestinians who have lived there, whose families have lived there for generations.
Hi, thank you for coming. I just had a quick question about how you feel about being Jewish and anti-Zionist, because some people think that Zionism and Judaism are together, so what's your opinion on that?
No, you can be a Jewish and not a Zionist, and I'm not a Zionist, and I never was. Am I not responding?
Can you explain to people who think that they are connected, like you have to be both?
No, you don't have to be both. You can be, unfortunately, too many Jews still are also Zionists. But you can be Jewish and not be a Zionist. I've never been a Zionist. My parents were not Zionists. And the two are not identical or simultaneous.
Last question. Hi, my name is Aisha Cohen, and I'm a Turkish American of Jewish and Muslim heritage. And my family left Jerusalem when the Europeans came to divide it. They were a Jew and a Turkish Muslim who had intermarried and went to Turkey and continued to intermarry within the Jewish and Muslim community there. And in Turkey this is possible, but in Israel now it seems almost impossible. I'm wondering, what hope do you think there are for congregations like mine who are Jewish and not Zionist, and for speakers like yourself who have been to Israel to unite together in a coalition to put an end to the violence and to the
artificial barriers that we put between ourselves in the Middle East?
Thank you. I'm an eternal optimist, and that's what keeps me going, I guess. Because if I were a pessimist, pessimists usually complain and do nothing, and the opposite I guess, is what an optimist is. An optimist is hoping for a better future and is working towards that goal. And so that's what I think. There are two types of people. Pessimists who throw up their hands and say, well, it's been bad, it's always going to be bad. And the optimist says, it may be bad right now, but let's work for it to get better. And so that's what we really, all of us, need to do. And instead of saying, well, it's bad and somebody ought to do something about it, each and every one of us has to be that someone else who does something about it. Because if you don't, then you become almost as guilty as the perpetrators. Silence means you're agreeing. So don't agree. Go out there and act, and start that petition to get rid of your president. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. We hope today's event was informative. Please join us tonight at 8 p.m. for Contextualizing the Politics of Palestine with UC Berkeley Senior Lecturer Dr. Hatem Bazian in Crystal Cove Auditorium in the Student Center. Thank you.